Hey friends, I'm RSKT. I picked myself up a Deluge recently and I've spent the last 4 or 5 weeks trying to figure out how to use it. And so far I'm really impressed. I really like this thing and it helps me make music that I never thought I'd be making. I posted a few tracks up on this channel recently showing what I was working on, and somebody reached out and asked how I go about finalizing tracks. So even though some people definitely prefer to stick to the whole DAW-less jamming side of things, I definitely do process all of those tracks inside of a DAW. I use Ableton to just tweak a few settings and try and make it sound more like something that I really want to listen to. I know a lot of people might consider that cheating because it's not exactly DAW-less anymore. And I guess they're right, but I consider it processing an instrument, just like I would process any other instrument I run into Ableton. So in this video, we're going to have a look at everything we can do on the Deluge and finalize it there as much as we can. And then we're going to jump into Ableton and look at the effects that I run it through. I've never really made a music tutorial before, so I'm a little out of my element, and I don't really have any mates that do this sort of stuff. So saying a lot of this terminology out loud kind of caught me off guard. These are all concepts that have just been living in my head silently for the past 4 or 5 years. And yeah, it turned out to be really weird talking about things like compression and saturation. So I hope I did a good job. I've done my best to make it as beginner friendly as possible and explain things in the best way that I can. That said, I'm not completely new to making tutorials. I have a second, way more popular channel that focuses on digital art. So if you ever get bored of making music, feel free to head over to that and check it out. I'll leave a link down below in the description. So let's jump on to the Synthstrom Deluge and have a look at what we can do. So I prepared this track for us to work today. It's only 8 tracks, and at the moment it sounds like this. So it sounds kind of okay at the moment, but there's a lot of improvement that we can make. It's a little messy and some elements are kind of conflicting with one another. So let's go through a few things and talk about how we can improve this. So you can understand exactly what you're looking at here, I'm going to solo through each track and just let you know what's going on in each row. So with the first track, you're not going to hear anything, and that's because it's turned all the way down and it's just triggering my sidechain compressor. This one's the kick and the snare. One underneath that is simple hi-hats. This row here is simply just a little bit of a percussive element, just to add some more flavor and texture to the drums. If we mix all of this together, it sounds like this. The next row down is my bass pattern. The one underneath that, some sort of melodic elements. A nice little background synth. And then this sort of row with the filter opening all the way up towards the end. So one thing I've noticed straight off the bat is that this bass track is actually, it's present, but it's a little muddy and quite hard to hear along with everything else playing. So I think that we should address that first and jump straight into gain staging. Now at the moment, this bass is actually turned up quite high. So let's just bring it down to about halfway and solo it out and just have a listen. So let's try and bring in some other bassier stuff and make sure that we can hear that alongside the bass as well. Let's turn on our kick and snare. So I'm just going to turn that row down a little bit. Let's have a listen to the next part here. So this melody line has a little bit too much bass for my liking, so let's clean that up. I'll select that, go to the EQ setting on the filter cutoff frequency area. Let's turn up the highs and just drop the lows all the way. Right, so now that's not interfering with the bass at all anymore. Going down to the next line, we've got this background synth. I definitely think that we could turn this one down just slightly, and maybe we'll just EQ the top down a little bit more. Check this final melodic element as well. Alright, so that's starting to sound a little bit weird, and I don't want it interfering with this main melody line either. Let's go to the EQ settings of this one. We'll drop all of the bass and just crank up the highs. I might add a tiny bit of reverb, and we'll just drop the level and slowly reintroduce it. Because these two rows are definitely sharing some of the same frequency area, what I would normally do is select one and just pan it a little bit to the left and the other one a little bit more to the right. Not all the way, because then you might run into some mono playback issues. At the moment, you're actually listening to this whole section in mono because I can't plug in these two stereo outs and record my voiceover at the same time. But when we play this back in Ableton and we're recording both of these outputs, it definitely makes a difference. Let's bring in the sidechain now. There's definitely a lot of ducking going on. I want it a little bit less on the bass pattern and on the main melody line. This filter could probably do with a tiny bit more. That's pretty good. We'll just check it with the hi-hats and other elements as well. Alright, those hi-hats are way too loud, we'll turn them down. Alright, sweet. So I think everything's sort of matched audio-wise. There's a couple of other things that I like to do in my mixes just to make certain elements stand out a tiny bit more. For example, with this bass pattern, if we just solo this right now. Now, I already went ahead and did this, but usually I'll just add on the tiniest bit of saturation. So without it, it sounds like this. And if we listen to that with everything else, unless you've got a half decent set of speakers, you're not really going to be able to hear that very well, especially on mobile. If you're planning on posting something like this to Instagram, people listening to it on their phones, it's just not going to cut through and there'll be no bass part for your listeners to listen to. So I'll press Shift Saturation and just reintroduce a tiny bit. Another thing that works really well with bass is if you go into the cutoff and frequency setting, you can click down here and switch it to drive, and that just adds more saturation to the bass element. Sometimes I find it's a little bit too much though, I'll just use the saturation for that bit. With the drums as well, I'll just go into my kick and snare pattern. At the moment we can definitely hear the kick, but there isn't really much thump behind it. It's more of a pop, like a very high treble pop. I think that we could add a little bit more to that. So we'll just select this and go into the EQ, just bring that bass up a little more. I'll turn this section up a little bit. Alright, now our snare sounds a little weak there as well. So just making sure affect entire isn't on because I only want to affect the snare row. I'll click and hold this, go to saturation. If we turn that off, it's like, it's very tinny, it's very weak. So at the moment it's at 3. If we turn it up a little bit more, it might get too crazy. I think 4 is pretty good. And I've got a little bit of reverb on that just to make the snare drag out a little bit longer. I also like adding the tiniest bit of saturation to my hi-hats as well, which I've already gone ahead and done. Cool, so at the moment we've gain staged everything. We've added in a little bit of saturation to make certain elements stand out a little bit more, especially for mobile users. And we've panned some things left and right so that they don't interfere too much if they're sharing the same frequency range. So at this point, you could set up an arrangement in the Deluge and record this to any external recorder or any DAW that you use. I use Ableton to do this, so I'm going to show you my process for mastering the track in Ableton, but pretty much everything I do in there can be applied to any DAW, whatever you're most comfortable with. I just use Ableton. So let's jump in and have a look. Okay, so here we are in Ableton, and I've gone ahead and created a channel called left, a channel called right, and then grouped them together underneath Deluge, just so that it's nice and clear. Once you've finished this project and you're happy with all of the effects that you add, I highly recommend saving it as a template file so that you don't ever have to recreate it again. You can just load it up, plug in your Deluge and jam away. So the left output of the Deluge is plugged into left and the right output of the Deluge is plugged into right, and I've selected my first and second inputs here to plug those into. You'll notice that the first one is going up and down, and that's purely because I've got my mic plugged into it now. I've actually gone ahead and recorded that little session on the Deluge just so that we can listen back to it in stereo, and it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm just going to be looping the entire song, and we'll listen back to how it sounds originally, and then we'll start applying some effects. Sweet. So let's click on the group Deluge, which is going to affect the left and right output. And you can see that I've got this effects chain built here. So let's run through this one by one and hear what each thing does, and walk you through how to use it. Just before we do though, when you're playing back your track from the Deluge, it's a good idea just to turn these down a little bit and make sure that nothing is clipping. So right now, if we look back, we can see that we're hitting around -12 decibels, and that gives us plenty of headroom to work with while we're mastering this. So first up, we have the glue compressor. This is giving a lot of compression to our track, but I'm mixing it in at about 40%. So we're getting some parallel compression, some of the original signal and some of the compressed signal mixed in together. So if we listen back to this now, there's barely any difference, but it's enough just to make the drums stand out a little more and try and sort of tie everything together. Have a listen. I'll toggle it on and off. If we turn this up all the way, it becomes really evident of what's going on. So you can set this up any way you want, and you can use any compressor that you want. I just like it to be there just to add a subtle bit of compression. Next up, I'm using a saturator. I do this just to throw a tiny little bit of dirt into the mix and make other things stand out. If we have a listen to it, I'll just toggle it on and off so that you can get a feel for what's going on. First up, you might notice that it actually sounds a lot louder, but if you keep an eye on the meters here, you'll see that we're not actually increasing the volume at all. If you find that this is a little bit too much, you can just dial the dry or wet back. I definitely change a lot of these settings depending on what kind of track I've made on the Deluge. This might even benefit a little bit more from something like 60%. So if I just toggle these two effects on and off now, you should be able to hear quite a difference already. To me, it just sounds like there's already so much more life and energy thrown into the track. So let's move on to the EQs. I'll just reset these. So with the first EQ, you could actually use a channel EQ or an EQ3, or really any EQ that you want. It doesn't have to be an EQ8. But basically all I'm doing here is either dropping or boosting the lows and dropping or boosting the highs. And I also like to cut out anything below 30 Hertz if I can as well, just to sort of help remove any additional mud that might be there. At the moment, I feel like the bass is definitely lacking in some parts. So let's have a listen. That main melodic line, the sort of piano percussive thing, I feel like it's standing out a little bit too much. Now, this is something that you could fix on the go if you've still got the Deluge plugged in. I don't have that luxury right now, so I'm just going to drop that sort of frequency range. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's move on to probably the most important part of this mixdown. That's this second EQ8. So what we're going to use this for is to help further boost certain frequencies that we want to stand out more, but also cut away unwanted frequencies, especially ones that are muddying up the mix or ringing out a little too long. Make sure that you've got the blue headphone icon selected here, and this means that as soon as we select one of these, only that frequency range will be isolated. So, and as soon as we let go, it'll go back to normal. Cool, so let's have a scrub through this and see if we can hear anything that really stands out. Yeah, do you hear that? That sort of annoying whistle? Yeah, I don't like that, and it might not be noticeable straight away when you're listening back to the track as a whole, but it's definitely there and it's making it sound bad. So let's just drop this one a little bit and have another listen to it on and off. Cool, let's do this a couple more times and just find other ones that are standing out in a really bad way. definitely think those high bass notes stand out way too much. So I'm gonna try and isolate that and try and just dip it down a little bit. There it is. I'm just going to add in this one here as well, just to boost those really low bass notes. Cool, so I think I'm pretty happy with how that's going so far. Now, there are definitely way more steps that you could take here. I think a really good idea also would be to do multi-band compression, especially if you've recorded everything as one track like this. That would probably be really beneficial. I just sort of like to do things quick and easy and get everything sounding nice. So let's have a listen to the difference that all of these are making together as a whole. This is, I'll just start it without the effects and then we'll toggle it on and off. Yeah, so pretty big difference to me. Like it's definitely subtle, but it's enough to stand out, and to me it just sounds a whole lot better. It's what I would do if I was making a track with any other instrument, and yeah, I think it fits the bill. So just another quick tip as well. We've definitely done a fair amount of gain reduction here. So if you're doing a lot of that, you might want to increase the gain slightly when you're A/Bing this against the original, just to sort of make sure that the volumes match. And yeah, I throw on a basic limiter at the end, and I mainly want the little yellow bar that drops down to be halfway between the 0 and the 6. So at about -3 decibels, just sort of enough to tickle the top of it. So let's just make sure that it's doing that. Awesome. I think that sounds really cool so far. The last thing that I recommend throwing on is a utility, just so that we can listen back to this mix in mono and make sure that those things that we panned left and right aren't being completely lost. It's actually a really good tool as well if you want to mono out the bass too. Alright, so listening back, I think that maybe the highs, like the hi-hats and stuff, are a little bit too loud. So I'll just drop those a little bit. So we're getting a little bit of clipping on our master here as well. So just make sure that you listen back and make sure none of that clipping is happening. Awesome, I'm really happy with that. So let's just do one last final A/B. I'll drag the limiter and utility out, and we'll just have one more listen. We'll leave these two on and just toggle this group on and off. Yeah, cool. I think that turned out really well. So yeah, I think that's everything that we can do in Ableton for now. I definitely think that one thing you could try that I haven't yet is just resampling each track individually and then loading each loop into Ableton, each one on a separate track. And that way you could pretty much build your entire arrangement, throw in extra effects, and manage the whole thing like you would an Ableton set. But I think, the whole reason I got a Deluge was to sort of move away from Ableton and see what I could pull off on a piece of hardware. So Ableton just adds a nice little bit of polish towards the end for me. All right, so that's it from me today, everybody. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below in the comments section. And if you have any feedback, even if it's negative feedback, please share it with me. This is kind of new to me, and I'd definitely like to make more music tutorials in the future. And I'd love to hear how you guys go about finalizing your tracks as well. So cheers. I'll see you in the next one.